What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. We are from the field again. Matt, it feels good to be out here on the grounds doing our thing. First, let's address the elephant in the room. It is me. It is Pat McGuire, your co-host. I have done this ridiculous thing. I have shaven my face for my job. I live in the 18th century with my work out at Fort Frederick, so beards are not a thing. So if you are like, who is this man? It's me, I promise.
Look how young he looks.
I look ridiculous. But, Matt, we're here today to talk once again about one of our favorite subjects. You know, we did this program, the Maryland Campaign of 1862 is what we're here to talk about. We did this a couple years back.
We did.
We started with our wheelhouse. We are back. Tell our listeners why we're back to do this year.
It is the 160th commemoration of the Maryland Campaign this year, 2022. 160 years ago in 1862, the first Confederate invasion of the North will explode across Maryland, leading to the single bloodiest day in American military history, the Battle of Antietam.
So we're here at White's Ford Regional Park in Leesburg, Virginia to get our story started. So before we talk about the importance of the river setting behind us here, Matt, let's bring our listeners up to speed. So we always like to start our story, as all stories, you got to pick a starting point. We could say from the beginning, we could do that, but we're going to start about June 1st, 1862. And the scene in this situation is the war is almost over. Federal forces are just outside of the city of Richmond, Virginia. This is the Confederate capital. In March, they had moved down to Fortress Monroe in the Tidewater region of Virginia, and they had basically begun to move up the Virginia Peninsula. They were coming at Richmond from the south, so they were moving north on the city. And we're close enough that our officers in the Union Army are saying what, Matt? That they can hear
the tolling of Richmond's bells. There's even claims amongst the Federal Officer Corps that they're setting their watches by the tolling of those bells. That's how close they're getting to the Confederate capital.
So what ends up happening, right? If they're this close in 1862, and we know this is the scene in 1864 and then into 65,
right,
we still have almost 3 years of fighting left. So here's what's happening, right? Joe Johnston has been the Confederate commander to this point. He has waged a primarily defensive campaign. And you could argue that it's been failing because the Union Army is on the outskirts of Richmond at this point. There's a series of battles Matt's going to bring you through in a second here, but it results in a change of command, and somebody we're very familiar with is going to take over for the Confederate Army that becomes the Army of Northern Virginia. So Matt, June 1st, how do we get ourselves, let's say, to August 28th, the Battle of Second Manassas?
Absolutely. What has happened is, and what Pat has been referring to, is federal forces grinding up the Virginia Peninsula. Johnson has been in command of this Confederate force. He's been waging a very defensive war. However, every time he tries to hold a line or a defensive position, federal resources are brought to bear, and he is forced to withdraw lest his men be cut off and destroyed. So we are now to the outskirts of Richmond, and at the end of May, we're going to have the Battle of Seven Pines. Now, on June 1st, Johnson is no longer in command. He's been wounded, badly wounded. We would have a brief period where a different commander...
The guy that ran the Saturday Night Live band, G.E. Smith. Wait, no. G.W. Smith.
That's right. G.W. Smith takes over for less than 24 hours, and then we would have this gentleman from Virginia brought in to be the commander, Robert E. Lee.
Now, old Bobby Lee has not been sitting in Richmond, sitting on his laurels, right? Try to imagine this for all of you who have an immense amount of anxiety when your boss even just walks into the room. Joe Johnston has not only had his boss, but has had his boss's advisor essentially hovering around him throughout his camp, observing these movements, kind of hemming and hawing at the decisions that are being made. So when this 24-hour period elapses and G.W. Smith is no longer in command, they don't have to go very far to find Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee is basically with the Army at this time already. So it's kind of a natural handoff. And things get going kind of right away once this happens, Matt. So tell our listeners about changing from defense to offense.
Right. Now, it's not a instantaneous change, but Lee is going to be in command for the rest of the Battle of Seven Pines. It will allow him to begin to organize his forces and pull in men from across the Confederacy, but particularly around the defenses of Richmond, pulling in these troops that are defending Richmond, defending Drury's Bluff, into his field army. And it's going to take him a little bit of time to organize this, because the Army of Northern Virginia at this point is organized into divisions. We don't have wings, we don't have corps yet. we have a series of disparate commands of various divisions. And Lee needs to wrap his head around this command structure, and to be perfectly honest, his division commanders need to figure him out. Now, this series of divisions that we're going to be calling the Army of Northern Virginia is the largest force Lee will ever command in the field. This command is actually going to be what he puts together for an offensive that would start at the end of June. Do you remember what this was called?
Is this the 7 days?
Yes.
I always get this. If you've listened to the episode we did with Kevin Pollak, I struggled mightily with this, as I imagine a lot of you do. There's 7 days and 7 pines. There's Mickey Mantle wears number 7. There's so many 7s, guys. Play 7 when you play lottery. It always wins. But here, we're talking 7 days, because there's a series of battles.
Series of battles fought over the course of the week. It really depends on how you cut these battles up, but generally it's seen as about 6 battles fought over the course of a week. Interestingly enough, in almost every one of those engagements, the Confederate Army, now on the offensive, is going to sustain more casualties than the Union Army receives. This is a trend that we're going to kind of see throughout the Civil War. If you're on the offensive, you're taking those casualties. And that's going to be true here. But Federal forces are so thrown off by the sudden aggressive action by Lee that they are going to give ground. And then they're going to go again, but I'm not, because I'll go in the river. Eventually, Federal forces, the Army of the Potomac, will fall back to a fortified camp on the James River, Harrison's Landing. There, the Army will be concentrated. We would have all the guns there, we would have earthworks there, and almost more importantly, the Federal Navy is behind them on the James River with their even bigger guns. Now, Pat, if you're Robert E. Lee, are you going to throw your forces at something like this?
No.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Instead, he begins shifting north, opening up what we refer to as the Northern Virginia Campaign, which is a fascinating campaign of movement and maneuver. We would see Lee's army broken into 2 distinct wings, Jackson commanding the left wing of the army, James Longstreet commanding the right wing. And Jackson's movements are going to force Federal troops into a fight at Manassas Junction, Second Bull Run at the end of August. Now, of course, there's a number of other engagements that occur before that. Cedar Mountain, fought on my birthday in 1862, August 9th, is one of those. But Jackson and Lee are going to bring Federal troops to bear on the plains of Manassas at the end of August, preparing for a crushing blow that would be landed by Longstreet near the end of that battle.
So our situation has changed dramatically since June 1st of 1862. By the time we move into August, McClellan's forces have fallen back to Harrison's Landing. Large portions of his army are being siphoned away, sent to another Federal army, the Union Army of Virginia, commanded by a guy named John Pope. This army is moving in on Lee to basically, you could make the argument, support, bail out McClellan's forces. We'll leave that debate up to you, but Lee recognizes this massive movement of Federal forces and breaks off from McClellan's forces and moves on General Pope. This is where we're talking about this big battle at Manassas, second time these armies have fought here, Union and Confederate armies. And it is a stunning defeat because John Pope's forces are basically obliterated. If it's not for some of these elements of George B. McClellan's command that make it there, such as the 9th Corps, we might not have a Union Army of Virginia to even talk about after the end of August 1862. These guys get ran into Washington, essentially. McClellan's forces a few weeks prior had been ordered and thus evacuated Harrison's Landing. And as we end August and begin September 1862, we have basically both of these Federal armies inside of the defenses of the city.
Right.
And things really change at this point, because if we hadn't covered it in any of our other episodes, let me cover it right now. The Confederate Army, the Confederate government essentially has 2 objectives: defend themselves, gain international recognition. Well, they've done a really good job of defending themselves. They prevailed at the first major battle of the American Civil War. They successfully moved 2 entire Federal armies out of Confederate Virginia. So what are we doing now? Are we just sitting here? We're going to hold the border? This is where things really change. We've used the theme going from defense to offense. And sure, that is absolutely the case when we have gone from just kind of trying to hold the line outside of Richmond to aggressively pursuing and pushing Federal forces up the peninsula and then later into Washington and things like that. But now we're really going to go on offense. Robert E. Lee is not just going to stop his army and have them sit at the Virginia border along the Potomac. Matt, September 3rd, 1862 is a pretty big day. A letter is written.
A letter is written, Pat. A letter to President Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, from Lee, laying out his not only desire to, but his reasons for crossing the Potomac River and entering Maryland. Now, it's important to remember, Maryland is a border state, which means it is a Union state that has retained slavery. The border states, particularly Maryland, are a potential objective for the Confederacy. But Pat, why do you suppose that Lee wants to take this risk? Because he lays out this plan on September 3rd, and his forces begin moving as early as September 4th.
It's multifold. You know, we'll cover them in no order here. First and foremost, Lee's army is hungry. These forces have been fighting all over the Virginia state, the peninsula, things like that, and they've been destroying crops that were planted earlier in the year that should have been due for harvest right around this time or in a month's time. But these fields are massacred, they are devastated, they are destroyed, so his army needs to eat. The citizens need to eat back home, so maybe they can bring some food stores back with them. This is a border state, as Matt has said, so there is this illusion of them as liberators when they cross into the state of Maryland. It is a popular belief that the state of Maryland is being held in the Union by force. Gonna squash that for you right now. Not the case.
Not the case.
We'll get into that on a different day, but it is absolutely and unequivocally not the case. As the evidence will suggest, when Lee's forces do arrive in Maryland, they are not exactly greeted warmly. They do not have influxes of signups and enrollees and people enlisting, which is the expectation. Is not only will we liberate the state, but we'll bolster our ranks.
Right, exactly.
The biggest thing he's looking for is a win in Northern Territory. That's the international recognition thing. So when the army is successfully defending Virginia by pushing these armies out, he realizes that might not be enough to basically say have a country like England or France, somebody step in on behalf of the Confederacy and recognize their sovereignty. So we're going to go after a big win in enemy territory. So that's sort of what takes us to this moment. And Lee writes this letter. He asks for permission. And he's not going to wait, right?
Right.
Jeff Davis is going to get this letter, and Lee is already on the move. And it's September 4th, 1862, when everything changes. Robert E. Lee invades Union-controlled Maryland for his first invasion of the North.
Now, beginning on September 4th, 1862, Confederate forces are going to begin crossing here at White's Ford, just outside of Leesburg, Virginia. White's Ford is behind us on this part of the Potomac River in this vicinity. Most of the ford does not exist today, though parts of it can still be seen at low water. Confederate forces will cross here and also at other crossing points further to the north or upriver along the Potomac, moving into Maryland. And another point to remember is that Maryland is having an off-year election year. 1862 is just like 2022. It's an off-year election year, and Lee is hoping to affect the political scene not only on the international stage, like you were talking about,
But
Pat.
extremely locally.
Exactly. If they can get more peace Democrats elected to Congress, this could lead to a negotiated truce between Union and Confederate states.
Now this scene coming into Maryland is kind of a stirring one. These guys are coming across on foot. They're not taking any planes. They're not riding in trucks.
Right.
They're barely even riding horses, mainly officers and teamsters, things like that. The majority of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia literally rolls up their pants, maybe takes off their shoes, but they march right across this stream, or river, pardon me. It's the Potomac River, guys. And they do it like Matt was saying, right in this area. And when they come across, the band is going to strike up the song, Maryland, My Maryland. And basically just what they're trying to do is stir up the local state patriotism, right? Remember, they believe they are an army of liberation coming into the state here. So they are trying to strike up the fanfare, get the local mojo rolling. You know, we love crab cakes and football and all things Maryland, baby. So that's kind of what they're doing, is they're trying to come in and be like, hey, we're all on the same team here. And that is really not what's going to be the case. So when we pick this up next time, we're going to be in Frederick, modern-day Frederick, Maryland. We're going to be in and around Monocacy National Battlefield, because the Army is going to move pretty quickly once they're in the Maryland side of the river. It's only going to be a couple days before they're camped in and around Frederick. So we'll pick it up from there, Matt.
Sounds great.